Hunting Ghislaine is... Once upon a time, there was a beautiful princess who suffered a tragedy, the death of her father, a war hero, philanthropist, and a good man in suspicious circumstances. It was the beginning of a dark fairy tale. The book is called Hunting Ghislaine. It is by John Sweeney. Delighted to be joining me live on the line from the UK, I believe. John himself. John, good to have you back with us.
Hi, it's wonderful to see you, Giles.
Yeah, good. Now, I have a confession to make here, John, because I thought last night I'll just do a bit of research for a change, and I popped on the podcast, and I think I'll just listen to the first episode of the podcast. About 3 hours later, I finished it, so thank you for that last night. My goodness. And that was, this is, of course, before the trial, which makes it even more interesting to hear what was going through our minds at a time, before COVID almost. But I mean, you describe it as a dark fairy tale. I know the story, but ye gods, the darkness within it is quite something.
Yeah. So, Netflix did a film, I think, called Filthy Secrets or Filthy Rich about Jeffrey Epstein. He's the multi-millionaire paedophile who ends up killing himself. I don't doubt that at all. Essentially, he is, has had a horrible perversion. He has a big liking for girls who are 14, 15, 16, who are just out of puberty. And in the Netflix film, they mention Ghislaine Maxwell as his pimp, and they mention the fact of her father, Robert Maxwell. But it's as an aside. And when I heard, when I saw that, I thought, no, I'm sure there's a story here. And essentially the story of Hunting Ghislaine, by the way, I mispronounced it for the podcast. It's not Ghislaine, it's Ghislaine. I now realise too late in the day. But anyway, there we are.
And it all starts with Robert Maxwell, the bouncing check, and I remember where I was on the day that news broke, and you remember where you were, the glamour of journalism, as you call it in the podcast so brilliantly. But it starts there. Yes. I thought I knew Maxwell, and then you hear the stories about him, shooting the mayor in Germany, and then you hear the stories about him basically defecating with the door open to prove power, and firing a man in front of his wife just before Christmas, and you just think the man was a monster.
Yes. So the thesis of the podcast, which becomes the book, and the actual thing in the book, if you like, is the trial, is that Ghislaine Maxwell was very messed up long before she met Jeffrey Epstein, and she was messed up by her father, who was a monster, who was, he came, the backstory is grim. He was from a very, very poor Jewish family in what is now Ukraine, was then Czechoslovakia. He got out. His mum and dad, most of his brothers and sisters were murdered in the Holocaust. He gets to fight with the British, and he's very good and very brave. He wins the military cross for doing something brave and good. And then towards the very end of the war, the Germans are surrendering left, right, and centre. And there's one mayor who surrenders, and somebody on the German side sort of fires a tank at the British. And so Maxwell shoots the mayor dead. Now, that is, I know enough about the case of war. That's a war crime straight there. But then you go into this. He's horribly abusive to everybody, his employees, his wife, but in particular his children. And there's absolutely no contest in my mind whatsoever that he is emotionally and psychologically abusive to the children, including Ghislaine, who's the youngest. And also there is some evidence that he may have sexually abused Ghislaine as well. Now, this evidence is, you've got to read the book and get into it. And I put this to Ghislaine's PR team, and they deny it. But nevertheless, it's a commonplace, isn't it, that people who sexually abuse people have often been sexually abused themselves in their childhood. And so the tragedy here, possibly, is that Ghislaine did what she did because she had no idea that what she was doing was wrong, because she's got no boundaries.
I haven't read the book, I've heard the podcast, as I said. 3 hours of my life gone, that brilliantly. The cat was very happy, but sat there all the time. But when it says, when I've been a bad girl, but my daddy lets me choose what I'm going to be punished with, and that stone cold, straight down the line, that's abuse, that's a childhood trauma. It is no excuse, but it sets the tone for what happens next after Maxwell's death, surely, John?
Yes. So, by the way, the source of that story, this being Maxwelliana, is a woman called Eleanor Berry, who has a history of mental illness. But she is also somebody with, it seems, a photographic memory. And therefore, there are people who know her, people who work for Private Eye, who believe her. You've got to read it. You've got to make your own judgment. So he dies. Robert Maxwell dies. He falls off his yacht, or was he pushed? Now, all the rest, there are 7 surviving Maxwell kids. 6 of them believe either it was an accident or Robert Maxwell, fearing shame because he was broke and he'd been stealing money from his own pensioners to get round that problem. They all believe that it was either accident or suicide. Ghislaine is the only one of the Maxwell children who believes that he was murdered. And there's no good evidence of that whatsoever. But basically, she loses everything. She loses her access to the fancy parties, the helicopters, the stretch limos, the private jets when her father dies. And then she gets it all back again because she meets Jeffrey Epstein. All she has to do is find him fresh children.
And she is the apple of her father's eye. I want to come back to that at the end because, as I said, there's a correlation between somebody, we're huge fans of, you and I, John, father-daughter relationships.
We're talking about Donald Trump.
Yeah, I am indeed, and that struck me. And actually, well, let's go to it anyway because we've crossed that line. But it's just going to say because as soon as I started to hear that, there's always been that whole thing about because Trump comes into this tale as well. His saying, Epstein's a great guy, but he likes girls younger than me. And then you think about some of the things that he said about Ivanka and the situation there. And at the end of the podcast, you draw a parallel between these two. When you speak to a psychologist, you draw some parallels between Ghislaine and Robert when Oxford United win the FA Cup, and she's clinging onto the side of her father. And then there's the same sort of picture down at Mar-a-Lago with Donald and his daughter. And again, and it's the what was it? The hostage princess syndrome.
Yes, it's the hostage princess syndrome. Essentially, narcissistic men like Trump, like Robert Maxwell, have a thing that they start ditching their actual partners in favor of their daughters. And so what you have is there's pictures of Donald Trump and Ivanka when he's something like 50 and she's 13, 14. And it's a very, very bizarre picture because she's wearing a kind of a mini skirt and a white top somewhere at Mar-a-Lago. And there he is kind of oozing something, which is just creepy and weird. And there's a similar picture. It's not the FA Cup, but for a time, Maxwell backed Oxford United and they won the Milk Cup, which is a smaller thing. But never mind. And there's a picture of the two of them together, Robert and Ghislaine. And there is this kind of, it would be wrong to say it's sexual, but it is in some way sexualized. And it's creepy and weird. And so you've got this is part of the narcissistic, it's one of the factors that help psychologists identify people who is a narcissist. And what it means is that essentially that Bessie, Robert Maxwell's wife, disappears. And one of the things he did was he bought himself a super yacht and he named it not after his wife, Bessie, but Lady Ghislaine. And that's the thing, he fell off. So the problem is, what are the boundaries that Ghislaine's got inside her head? What are the things that make her say, you know what, I'm not going to do that because it's wrong? And it feels as if Robert Maxwell had trampled over all of that. And so that she doesn't know what's right and what's wrong. All that matters is keeping daddy or the daddy figure sweet. And that's exactly what she does with Jeffrey Epstein.
And Epstein comes out of nowhere. There are rumors about his sexuality, and he signed over the power of attorney to a huge amount of wealth and the name's gone completely out of my numbskull, but never.
Let's leave it like that, shall we?
Yeah, let's leave it like that.
All concerned deny any wrongdoing. There are rumours about that, but essentially the headline has to be is that Jeffrey Epstein is very good at maths. He's got some kind of sleazy, manipulative charm, and he's very charming, and he's met and he's gone on with a number of rich people. And what he does is he says, listen, give me power of attorney, which is you normally do it for. I did it for my mum when she was suffering from dementia, and this is a classic thing. These people are in their mid or late career; they're in their 50s some of the time, and what he does, I believe, is take the responsibility and the legal authority for moving money away from the American taxman into various schemes around the world. And if something goes wrong, he takes the fall. Well, that doesn't happen. He manages it successfully, but he takes his 10% or something like that. And he becomes extremely rich. Not a billionaire, but worth something like $600 million, I think, in his pomp. He's got 4 islands. He's got he's got 4 properties, a great big, probably the largest private house in Manhattan. He has a villa in Palm Beach, just down the road from Mar-a-Lago. He's got a little St. Jeff's, this island in the Caribbean, and he's got a massive ranch in New Mexico. So now Ghislaine runs his life. They're lovers for a time. She wants to marry him. And it is sad, when we came to the court case, there was a whole series of pictures that came out, photos. And the jury and the journalists were allowed to see most of the photos. And virtually every single one is that she looks at him adoringly, and he looks kind of, okay, she's good for the mo. But they're lovers for from 92 to about 96, 97, 98. Then there's a bit of on and off stuff. There are other women around. But what she does do for about 13 years is run his life from 1992 to 2005. And he likes having 3 massages a day with these 14, 15, 16-year-old girls. And she organizes it to begin with. And then she organizes the structure where other women are delegated to do what she did originally. And what was grimly fascinating about the court case is that they found 4 women, all of whom were beautiful at the time, all of whom were essentially groomed and seduced by Ghislaine. And then Epstein arrives. So what happens is you've got if you're 14, 15, 16, you don't get into a car with a man. But if it's a lovely kind of Mary Poppins figure with an English accent, hello, would you like a ride? Then bang, off you go. And that is what she did again and again and again.
And also, she offers these girls, I mean, because it's very easy to go, it was rock and roll socialite, and everybody focuses on the black book, and everybody focuses on the parties, and everybody focuses on the famous, the rich, the famous, who was in the Lolita Comet, Lolita Express, there was the name for the jet. Yep. But the victims. We always forget the victims in in a crime case. We forget the people to whom terrible things were done. And you describe that from the glitz and the glamour from Palm Beach, it's a 20-minute ride to Trailer Trashville. And these are girls from that side of the tracks who were offered by this, and it is, the Mary Poppins figure. Would you like to be a masseur? Well, I can help you train to get that. We can help you with your artwork if you're a budding artist. Let me help you, so-and-so. And so these children, these 14-year-old girls, 15-year-old girls, are lured by that promise. And all you've got to do is massage Jeffrey while he's on the phone. It sounds so. And these are girls, and their friends are saying it's an easy way to make some money. And they suddenly found themselves lured in by that, preyed on. And then it's not like, we're adults. We can go, well, they should have gone to this and shouldn't go that. But the shame, the shock, the trauma, even 20, 30 years later, it's still evident.
Yes. So what happens is that there were 4 women who gave evidence against Ghislaine in court. The first of them was an American actress, a woman of real beauty, who is a soap star actress, very well known in the States, less well known in Europe. And essentially her father died very young. And they went from being a very successful family to being dirt poor because he died of, I think, leukemia. And they were suddenly on the uppers. This woman's mother couldn't cope with the tragedy. And what happened was that at 14, this girl was, she met, first of all, Ghislaine, her dog, then Epstein. Then she says Ghislaine groomed her. And then she started giving Epstein sexual massages and was completely groomed by the pair of them. She tried to talk to somebody at school about what was going wrong, and her mother said, "Don't ever talk about family stuff." And so, she, although she was actually she was from a family which was broken. Her father's loss, her mother's difficulty in dealing with it, and Ghislaine and Epstein saw their opportunity. The second woman was British, again, actually really quite wealthy, considerably wealthier than the first one. A broken parental relationship, and this woman is in a mess. And she's 17, but she's groomed, and the same thing happens. Now, her evidence was supplementary to the prosecution case, and the jury was told you can't convict on her stuff alone. But nevertheless, she told the story, and she told it very powerfully and very well. The third witness was trailer trash, as she said herself, a woman called Carolyn. And the point about Carolyn was that she was painfully honest in and being open with the court about how stupid she'd been. And she'd get $200, $300 from Epstein, and she'd spend it on drugs. And then at one point, when she's 16, she runs away with a hopeless pimp of a boyfriend. They have a baby. And when she comes back, she's desperate for money, gets in touch with Team Epstein, and she suddenly realizes she's too old. She's 18. Mm-hmm. Her boyfriend comes to court and gives evidence completely in support of Carolyn's testimony. Now, they're not together, but he was a very, very powerful witness in favor of the prosecution case. Then the fourth witness is a woman called Annie Farmer, who was 16, who was told, listen, there's going to be a whole group of you, like 20 kids. You're all going to see whether you can get money from the Epstein Foundation to pay your way from university. She's from a broken home, money's tight, fantastic. The other kids aren't there. It's just Ghislaine and Epstein in New Mexico. And then weirdly, because I did this film about Scientology, Scientology has got a secret base in the same desert about 100 miles away, and it's one of the creepiest places I've ever been to. It's so empty. It's so lonely. It's so dark and creepy. And this 16-year-old girl is there, and she says that she was sexually massaged by Ghislaine, and she feared that Epstein was watching. So, and again, her evidence helps paint a picture of all that was going on. Now, she was supported by her boyfriend at that time, who, or rather, she had a relationship a few months later, and this was a real problem for the couple, for the young couple, these two young lovers, because she told him about what had happened, and again, this was serious testimony of this pattern of abuse, which I think the prosecution set out incredibly powerfully. then we heard the defence, and I, like all the other reporters and everybody else who's been following the case, I was incredibly keen to hear Ghislaine's defence. She offered no testimony. She didn't hit the witness box. But what the witnesses they did provide were irrelevant to the issue. What you do is say, okay, so let's take Annie Farmer, who is the 16-year-old taken to New Mexico on a lie. We can prove that Annie Farmer, on the weekend that she says she was in New Mexico, Ghislaine was in Paris, Epstein was in London, game over. No evidence like that whatsoever. So, and it was less than 2 days, and I can remember saying to my fellow reporters, you know what? Excuse me, sorry, it's my phone going off. There is no defence because there is no defence. It was desperate, which is why the jury found her guilty. But the problem is, and I do feel sorry for Ghislaine Maxwell because her father was a monster. That's true. At the same time, she used her fancy lawyers, who she paid lots of money to essentially rip the 4 women witnesses to shreds, to make them out to be whores or liars or money grubbing. And it was disgusting. It was completely disgusting and wrong. And you saw it and you go, ugh, this is horrible. So during the court case, my sympathy went down and down and down and down.
Because at the end of the day, yes, okay, she had a monster of a father. She had a monster of a relationship. She was badly abused. But at some point, you have to put your hand up and say, I take responsibility. This is my life, and we are. We interview a lot of people, John, and we meet people who are in even worse circumstances. That they haven't been flying to Manhattan or Mar-a-Lago or whatever, and they've come from the what's-it side of the tracks, and they've got their lives together and get on with it. Yes. And poor Ghislaine, whatever you want to call her. Yes, we can understand that she's scarred, but being scarred is no excuse to lose your moral compass.
Yes, as you know, I've been reporting the war in Ukraine, and this gave me, no one died in Epstein's massage tables. Good. On the other hand, it was an industrial scale of abuse against these, it was like a child factory. It was awful. Again and again and again, and it's money and power abusing their position, and they deliberately hunted for trailer trash. I'm putting that in quotes if you can't see what I'm doing. But trailer trash because they're poor, because they come from broken homes, because Epstein and Ghislaine knows they don't have lawyers to fight. And for the book, I actually wrote it a year ago, but then I had to we wait until we had a clear decision on the verdict and the sentencing. And so that pushed things back a bit. So I'd forgotten some of the emotional impact of the trial, and watching Ghislaine's lawyers savage the 4 witnesses, in particular Carolyn, the trailer trash one. And I felt when I, just to check the book that everything was okay, which I was going to reread this summer, and I got to the chapters on the trial, and again, I just thought, oh my God, this was cruel beyond belief. And actually, the part of it, the other thing is, like, the moment Epstein is arrested for the second time, she vanishes. Like, and it's what's going on there. I mean, if, like, you're not running from the media, you've got to be able to say to yourself, what you should have done is said, Jeffrey Epstein was a horrible, terrifying man, and I was afraid of him and enthralled of him. Now that he's been arrested, then he kills himself in prison. There's no doubt in my mind about that. Read the book if you doubt me. but there's she could have said, I was afraid of him and I was enthralled of him. It was like I was in a cult. Now that he's dead, I can now come out and say, I am so sorry.
John, we're going to crash the news, but go and check out the book, which is John Sweeney, Hunting Ghislaine. Also check out the podcast, Sweeney Talks. It's worth it. John Sweeney, thank you so much for your time today.